that I'm most keen on you doing is that you ask questions today. It's really, really important to us that this seminar is meant to be a practical seminar in terms of you finding out things that you want to know about work in publishing and about the broad range of work that goes into publishing. And I'm really glad that my colleague Luke Brown is going to be talking to us today. But as I say, we have a number of talking points, Luke and myself, but we are actually going to be asking you to lead the conversation as well. I'm going to tell you about Luke. Luke worked for 10 years for Tyndall Street Press. Tyndall was a small press based in Birmingham, which had a kind of an incredible run, which involved reaching the Booker Prize 3 times with authors, many of whose names you will know, and many of whom went on to other larger publishers subsequently. Luke is a novelist himself. He has worked as deputy editor for Granta magazine, and he has also been working as a lecturer at Manchester for a number of years. His new novel, Theft, I still think of it as a new novel, Luke, so fresh it was, and it's a pre-pandemic novel, but came out from And Other Stories a couple of years ago, and is a wonderful book. But since then, he has taken on a role at Serpents Tale, and that role has really kind of solidified even further over the time he's been there, so that he's now a commissioning editor at Serpents Tale, the terrific independent fiction publisher, which is based in London, where Luke lives. So Luke, I might begin maybe by asking you a little bit about how you found your way into publishing, and what was it's something we talked about last week, Simon, as well. What was your route into it?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So I went to Birmingham University and stayed on there, and the first job in publishing I got was it was a sort of book that they made books for graphic designers and web designers, and they tried to make them trendy. It was called Friends of Ed, Friends of Every Designer, and my job was a web PR administrator. What was it called? A web PR executive or something like that. And my job was to write to cool designers and get them to feature our books and create this sort of word of mouth around designers. And it was about code. I didn't know anything about what I was talking about, and I had no interest in it whatsoever. but it was a sort of promotional job, and it lasted about a year before I was made redundant because they'd overexpanded massively, and that was a kind of interesting beginning to publishing, because it made me realise how precarious it is actually. You know, that there's this company that had grown very big and sort of lost its way a bit, really overreached, and had to make a lot of people redundant. And it also made me realise that it's how much publishing is about hustling and like trading on our independence and asking for favours and approaching people and giving people our books and getting them to talk about it, which is what you do as an editor as well as a web PR, whatever I was. And after that, I looked for jobs in publishing. I'd done an English degree, and I didn't have any success looking for the big jobs in London because I wasn't, in retrospect, I wasn't as driven and well organised and Oxbridge educated or whatever, or I didn't have the connections. I don't know if that was why, but I wasn't on it like people were my age probably who were going there, who had done internships and things like that. But I did get involved in a small press called Tyndall Street Press. I did a creative writing module in my last year of my undergraduate, and the woman who taught me that had a story coming out in the first book by Tyndall Street Press, which is called Roads. No, it wasn't called Roads. It was called Hard Shoulder, and it came out in, I think, 1999. And I went to the launch and was very thrilled by this kind of like gang of writers from Birmingham who were all getting together, and it grew out of a writing group. And so I stayed in touch, and I followed them, and I wrote a story which got published in an anthology called Birmingham Nouveau. And eventually I saw an editorial assistant job come up. It was a part-time job. I think I was paid half of £13,000, which I somehow managed to live on whilst being a writer. And I think part of the reason I got that job, I think, is because I asked lots of questions about how they made money when I went for the job interview, and asked lots of practical questions about how the books were sold and what they needed to do to survive. Tyndall Street Press was an Arts Council funded press, so we didn't work on the commercial logic of the market exactly. You know, we received some money from the Arts Council. I think it was about £40,000 a year. And the reason we were funded by the Arts Council was because we were doing something different. We were proudly regional. We sold ourselves as an alternative to a metropolitan bias of London-based fiction. And the only books we didn't publish any books from London. We published books from the English regions, and that's what we were funded for. And we had quite a lot of success. With these books. You know, we were on the Booker Prize list 3 times in the noughties. We won the Cost of First Novel choice, but they're all, I mean, our biggest successes were all women from Birmingham. And we launched all our books in Birmingham. We had a big community around that, and so we found, what I realized is it was a space to write towards. If you were in Birmingham and you were a writer, you would write towards us, or you would come to the events, or you might come to the events. And so it wasn't an accident that all our best writers, the ones that we found and were missed by the kind of bigger publishers, or we found before, that were local writers, and, you know, who turned out to have international appeal, you know, sold in like 20 or 30 territories and translated into 20 languages. So yeah, that was a long answer.
That's an extremely unusual success story, though, for a small press, you know, and with a kind of a funded for a regional element. And I guess one of the things that I'd like to ask you about is, you know, when you're that successful and you're entering into kind of the game that the big boys are playing as well, but you've still got to operate on Arts Council imperatives as well. It's one of the strange things about publishing is how you can combine both. You've got many different masters, and I wondered if you could say something about that in that first job, that weird dance you have to do.
Yeah, well, the Arts Council funding is an interesting one, because I suppose you're funded in some sense because you're claiming that what you do doesn't make money, but you're also trying to make money out of the thing. So by publishing, yeah, it's a good question. You know, that we never thought that there was anything parochial about publishing writers from Birmingham. You know, Birmingham's always had like a slightly jokey reputation in the rest of the country. I think, you know, it's not seen as cool as Manchester, say, or London. There's something comic in the public imagination about Birmingham, I think, and one of our writers had been the first book. It grew out of a writers group, and they published a writer called Alain who'd had a rejection saying great stories, but nobody's interested in reading about, you know, stories set in Birmingham. I think that was some crass thing. Why don't you set them in Shepherd's Bush or something ridiculous like that? I don't know how. And so that gave the confidence really to publish these books. And yeah, you're balancing a lot, you know, because we were an indie and we traded on favours. We asked, you know, we wrote to Jonathan Coe saying, please help us. You're a Birmingham writer. We need help. You know, I mean, that's one of the things you can do as an independent, which you can't do as Penguin. You know, you can't go. You know, we would write to people and go, it's very hard. We're trying to make something work. Please help us. And we got a lot of support by that, because people wanted an alternative to London-based publishing, and you know, all these people who grew up in Birmingham felt passionate about it and wanted to change the public perception of it, or wanted to believe that something could start from grassroots in a city like that, and go on to success. And the success we all had was with prize lists, and that's the great thing about being independent in some state. Or you have the same, you can enter for the Booker Prize, you know, and we would have fewer books, and book writers who published with us would never have got entered for the Booker Prize on Penguin or something like that, because they've had all these big writers who would expect the slots. So the advantage of being published by a small press in some sense is that your book is more like, you know, in theory, a smaller book might get entered for the big prizes in a small press than a book that has a certain expectations around it in other presses. Yes, if that makes sense.
It does. And Luke, one of the questions I think I was, you know, interested in talking to Simon about last week as well is publishing is always talking about how everything is changing. And it has been ever since I've had any, like, you know, last year's evidence to some extent on how the business, there's always an apocalyptic feel that the end of the world is nigh for a publisher. And you've I suppose, what are you, in your you know, relatively, you've been experiencing different kinds of publishing over, you know, the last 2 decades. I was wondering what have been the big changes in terms of, you know, the indies. I'm going to come to Serpents Tale in a while, but say the indies and how they work.
Well, over the big change over the noughties was Waterstones becoming the only bookseller in town apart from Amazon and the independents. You know, there was Ottakar's, there was Dillon's, there were a number of chains, and so when I started, it was easier to sell books. You know, if you missed out on, it was less. These days, if Waterstones don't take your order, you can sell nothing of a book, basically. Whereas in those days, there were different promotions, and so you were pitching to different people. And if Waterstones didn't order many copies of your book, and then Ottakar's might, or Dillon's might, Borders might. Now, if Waterstones doesn't take the book, you're pretty much doomed in large numbers. Unless the prize happens that makes them take it, you know, unless something happens, unless the PR around the book drives sales in a certain way, and then they respond. But the other thing I suppose that changed a lot in the noughties was we relied a lot on the 3 for 2 promotions, and I think we did quite well out of, you know, there used to be a standard promotion in Waterstones, 3 books for 2, and you would pay a bit of marketing sum to get your books on those tables. And I think it might have persuaded people to take a punt on it. We might have been people's 3rd book, you know, after they've got the Amos and the Barnes, they might have bought Claire Morale, you know, or something like that. So that's kind of gone now, and probably for the better as well. We're a culture that there's nowhere in Europe that pays less for their books than we do. It's much easier if you're French or German to make a living as a publisher. They have a net book agreement, and they, you know, books sell for like 20 euros or something like that, which we sell ours much cheaper.
That's good. And Luke, sorry, just to go back to one thing, and sorry, just to remind everybody, you can please use the chat function just to pop your questions for Luke into the chat box. Type them in there, please, and I will come to you and ask you to say it, but just let us know what you're thinking in there. And do pop them in as we're going along. How many staff were there? Just mentioning Claire Morale just makes me think Astonishing Splashes of Colour. Like that was you know, I remember it so well. But how many staff were there for you at Tyndall Street?
When I started, we had 1 full-time member of staff, my boss Emma Hargrave, who was our managing editor, and we had Alain Marr, who founded the press. He was part-time and I was part-time, so I guess we had 2, you know, but three people working the equivalent of 2 full people. As we went on, we expanded a little bit. Sometimes we had 4, sometimes we had 3. It went up and down depending on the need of the organisation, and by the end I think we had 4 or 5, but then we went bust, so that was probably too many. But it meant you're sort of jack of all trades. So my job title was editorial assistant, but I was the publicist, I was the head of publicity too. So I did all the chatting to journalists and ringing up literary editors and getting shouted at. These calls don't help, you know. While my boss stood on in the corner and made me do it. Horrible job.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we were talking last week to Simon a little bit about the kind of Swiss Army knife nature of what's required in publishing, that you've got to have, but like I think that brass neck bit is really kind of it's terrible part of it, and nobody, well, maybe somebody does like doing it, but it's pretty awful, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you're always asking people for favors, really. You're always asking writers to read a book that they don't want to read, you know, they want to read the books that they've bought themselves, but you're always asking for a favor, for a quote. I mean, it's not as bad as that, because the literary editors do want to hear from you. You know, their job is to fill newspaper pages with books coverage, so they do need you, and you know, they're not just giving you favors. They sell papers based on that, and it's important to remember, I think. Right, as we had some success, I was suddenly able to realize that I wasn't just this like peasant from Birmingham knocking on the doors of the upper class, you know, and asking the things. We had a reputation, and we deserved, you know, that I had the rights to ring them up. So that was very helpful, because until that moment, we were on the Booker shortlist in 2003. That changed the direction of press entirely. It suddenly we were prestigious, and people knew who we were. And then you know, and we had quite a lot of success from 2007 to 2009.
Yeah.
And that meant, you know, you gain confidence when you're doing that as a publicist. You realise that you're not asking favors as much as just doing your job, and they expect you to do your job. I can see a lot of questions are coming up. So
okay, well, there's a bunch of Brummies, and they're not shy at all about it. Like, you know, so Tom asks a very easy question: Is Tyndall Street still going, or has it gone down the fiery road to hell? London.
Yeah, well, we managed to bow out gracefully. We were going bust, and we needed to sell ourselves. We needed to, in order to cover some debt, and so I approached Andrew Franklin, who I work for. He's the man who runs Profile Books, which is a great independent publisher, and he bought the list from us, which was for exactly the amount of money we owed, and it allowed us to. I'd stayed on for a bit to oversee the new books we had coming out, so no books were cancelled, and we closed down the most graceful way possible. All the books that we published transferred, and if they're in print, they're still in print. You can still buy those books. Royalties are still paid to the authors. So you do hear some awful stories of there's a publisher called Freight in Glasgow that went down in the most acrimonious, disgraceful way, and everyone lost their books and their money. And so we managed to go. Yeah, it doesn't. The label lives on. You can still buy Tyndall Street Press books with the Tyndall Street Press colophon, but we don't commission new ones. I suppose I could always try and resurrect it now. Now I do work for Profile Books and another thing, but I've got enough on my plate with my current one. But yeah, no, so it doesn't exist anymore, and it was a victim of slight overreach from us. We tried to do everything that the big boys did. We were doing hardbacks and second editions. I mean, it used to be we keep our overheads quite short with like just short paperbacks and sort of like a B format size, which is sort of this size, but the thing is, you bring those out for like $7.99, $8.99, and if something like happens, you know, if you win a prize, you're still selling your book, you know, at quite a low price. Whereas, you know, if you're on the book list with a kind of £15 hardback, the margins are greater, and then you get to relaunch it a year later with all the quotes and stuff like that, and take it to the bookshop and get your second sort of bite and make a more commercial package. And so that's the logic behind doing those two formats. Yes. But the problem is the first format's died, and the B format's probably going to die as well, and it's very hard to sort of relive that. So we were spending a lot more money on covers and things like that, and we overreached, and we didn't watch the numbers carefully enough, and so we had to sell ourselves. Yeah.
And sorry, another Birmingham question from Uzma. Uzma asks, as a Brummie writing a story set in Birmingham, how would you say the publishing scene has changed for my book's prospects?
I think for the better, I hope, than 20 years ago. I think Birmingham's on the up as well. I think Birmingham doesn't have quite the same. I think it seems quite an exciting city now. I mean, I've always found it a wonderful city. I loved it there from the moment I arrived in '97. But yeah, there is now an awareness that publishing is too London centred and places are opening up. It's interesting. I don't think anyone has moved to Birmingham, which seems like an obvious. Everyone seems to be making the move to North, you know, and that's how they show their. But Birmingham's a cheap city, and well, I don't know if it's cheap anymore. It used to be a cheap city, comparatively, of course. Nothing's cheap in this country, but and I don't thought it was a perfect place in some senses. You know, so close to London, so close to everywhere. Really, you're right at the centre of things. So yeah, I wonder if one of the bigger places will open an office in Birmingham. It would make sense to me.
Okay, well, that's a little bit of publishing advice for those of you out there thinking of starting your own press and maybe moving to Birmingham. Don't do it, I say. Luke, there are a bunch of other questions here, but I want to first of all just ask you about Serpent's Tale.
Yeah.
You know, a really, you know, established, you know, a big house really, with a wide range of books in it, and what your role is and what your sense is of the larger team and how it fits.
Yeah, well, it's the first time I've ever had a neat division of labour in some sense as in my publishing career, and that I'm an editor, and we have publicists who do the stuff I used to do. We have production staff who do the stuff I used to do. We have managing desk editors who do the stuff I used to do. So my job has become more streamlined in a sense. Well, my role as a commissioning editor is to find books and edit them to the stage where a copy editor can take over. A copy editor being the person who standardizes things and looks very carefully for repetitions and things like that. It's like micro line editing. So when I edit, I'll do like 3 or 4 drafts with an author normally. I'll respond first with very structural notes about, and I take on a lot of stuff that's not quite right. I take on more stuff that's not right than other editors do, because we don't pay as much, and I know I can edit. You know, I think part of being a creative writing lecturer is helpful as well. I know I can help writers get better, and a lot of editors, you know, I'm blowing my own trumpet here, can't do that. They don't really know how to. You know, there are editors who just, they're buyers. They're part of the job. Part of the job as an editor is to buy. You know, is to commission, and part of the job is to improve. And part of the job is to promote and package. You know, the other thing you're responsible for as a writer is the packaging. You know, you lead the cover discussions. You are responsible for the quotes that get on the cover. You know, I'll give you. So this is a book. This is my first book I've published. I'm going to publish The Serpents Tale by a graduate from the MA and undergraduate in the Centre for New Writing. It's called Nat Ogle, and it's coming out in January. And what have I got to say about this, really? It's kind of a controversial, or not controversial, provocative novel about a sexual abuse trial that comes through. It's narrated by a nurse, and it's told in documents. It's a really strange book, actually. You can see these like police in scripts, and then what else do we have in it? There's like 4chan, or sorry, this is probably absolutely impenetrable when you say it, but digressing. My job falls into 2 things. I get sent an awful amount of manuscripts from agents, normally literary agents, maybe like at the moment about 3 a day. I'm one of the few men who works in publishes fiction, so I get probably 75% of it by men, because they just think, well, he's a man, he might read that. There is a sort of sense that the male literary novel at the moment is of less value and less likely to sell than the female literary novel.
Luke, I've got a question for you, which is from Joe Hunter on this, which you might be able to answer. So Joe asks, can you say something about why in the last year you've spoken about gender in terms of new writers and in terms of publishing at large? And are the semi-recent changes in the demographics of publishing something that you now have greater insight into since you're at for Serpent's Tale?
Yeah, I mean, I read, have I spoken out about it? I do seem to have given a couple of quotes that get reused. There is, if you're in acquisitions meetings, you know, one of the things I do, you know, if I want to buy a book, I take it to an acquisitions meeting, and in that acquisitions meeting, publicists, you know, there'll be representatives from publicity, from marketing, from sales, and the book, my pitch will be interrogated. You know, the book, people will have read it, and publicity will be thinking, well, how will I get publicity for this book? And at the moment, it's easier to get publicity for. There are more outlets that cover fiction for women readers than there are for men. You know, the simple fact of the matter is also that women read more than men. You know, so it's it varies. The books, it varies across the different genres. You know, there are certain genres which are read by more men than women, such as crime, fantasy. Maybe not crime, but crime is roughly equal. Fantasies and sci-fi is massively male. General fiction is something like 75% women, and general fiction is the category that includes literary fiction. So classic fiction, for example, is about half and half women and men. So it's really interesting when you start breaking it down by codes, and you realise that this idea that women read more than men is true, but it's also much more nuanced than that. If you look at different categories, then you see that certain categories are not so divergent in gender split. But yeah, it's one of the reasons it's hard to sell books by men, in theory, is that there are three major prizes that sell books: the Costa, the Women's Prize, and the Booker Prize. And as a man, you can be entered two of them. As a woman, you can be entered three of them. So that's just a simple statistic thing. You know, that you have one more ticket in the lottery as a female writer. The other is this general, I guess it's a correction, you know, it's that we're living in an era where we're correcting the history of male writers being taken more seriously than women writers. That's the reason Virago Press started, you know, to combat that. We've reached a point now where arguably that battle has been won. We might, you know, that's very arguable, and people may still think that male writers gain greater prestige than women, or are taken more seriously. But in terms of sales, women writers sell more than men these days in literary fiction, which is the area of publishing I'm most interested in.
No, that's great, Luke. I think you know, it's just interesting to have seen that shift. And I guess prize culture, like, it's something that's studied here at Manchester. It's one of the things that our colleague Kay Mitchell teaches and writes about how influential and instrumental it has been. You know, when you're at Tyndall, it was the making of the press, and now it sort of makes the weather for literature and for, you know, for other forms as well, more than anything else, I guess. Do you think that's the case?
Yes, yeah. I mean, there are other ways of selling books. You know, there are words of mouth, crime fiction. You know, genre fiction works without prizes mostly.
But I guess I'm thinking about your work in literary fiction.
Yeah, I mean, it's still very much the case that, you know, the great Booker lottery every year. That's you know, as a writer too, you know, like, it's hard to concentrate when that thing is coming out, because you're thinking, you know, I'm not going to get on the book list, but oh, it'd be nice if I'd got on the book list, and that would transform my life, you know, and it would, you know, that would immediately take me up an echelon in saleability and prestige, and every year some people win that lottery, and their careers go through a surge.
No, that's great. That's very good. Now, look, I'm sorry, it's great. There are loads of questions here. So Chris has asked about how audiobooks and Audible do they influence your decision making on what you commission? And is Audible a significant revenue generator now? So Audible is, you know, is this the audiobook market?
Yeah, well, audio is important. I don't know the figures really, but we, you know, as company policy, we insist on buying audio rights with a book. We won't. Sometimes agents try and keep them for themselves, but we, you know, that's our hard line. No, the audio, because we don't want to publish a book and edit it and then somebody else to make the money. you know, on the thing that we've produced, even if we haven't recorded the thing and done the studio work. But yes, audio, it's a big sale. People like them, and particularly in things like crime and things like that, they're really lucrative. The ebook thing is massive as well, of course, particularly in crime fiction and genre fiction thrillers. The ebook market is massive, and then the margins on ebooks are brilliant, because once you've made the file, everything is just, there's no costs involved at all. You know, the users, Amazon takes its cut, and then the rest of the money comes to you, and 25% goes to the author. So it's much, and there's no risk of returns or pulping or getting the print order wrong, and not getting the economy of scale on the print run, which you have to judge. You know, like, do you print a certain amount because they get cheaper every you know, it's a unit price at 5,000 is much less than at 2,000. So if you end up doing 2 runs of 2,500, you pay a lot more than you've done 1 run of 5,000, but you may have way too many books. So that's the kind of part of the publishing as well, as judging how many books you might need and trying to be realistic, and also not to be too pessimistic, and not to end up fucking yourself. But not end up screwing yourself over by being stingy. You know.
No, that's great. I've got a question here from Claire Patterson, and Claire is just a little bit related to how you're talking about, you know, the various kind of contexts that you have to think about when you're taking on a book, and the various teams that you have to engage with. And Claire asks, does a background in writing serve you well when looking for a job in publishing, a degree or an MA in creative writing, say, or is it better to emphasize skills and experience in similar roles, even if they're a different sector, like design skills, admin, events, and so on?
Well, all those things would be great to emphasize in an application. I think if you want to be an editor or PR, then publicist, then the better your writing skills, the more concise and persuasive your prose, the better. And that's one of the things that creative writing teaches as a discipline that, say, you know, doing a degree in modernism might not teach you to. You know, that's the creative writing prizes persuasive, clear, concise language in a way that other academic disciplines don't necessarily. Although I'm sure that's probably, you know, I don't want to be too down on the academic writing. Most of my colleagues I know in other disciplines also prize clear, concise language. I think we prefer students wrote in that manner. Where am I going? The event stuff is great. I mean, I got my first job at Friends of Ed by one of the things I spoke about was promoting music nights in Birmingham. With my friends and I used to put on drum and bass nights in like bars and things like that, and house nights, and you know, we used to put on club nights. And he liked that. He liked that idea of the hustle, because you know, he wanted to put on like cool events to promote the brand. So sort of emphasize. If you've done anything promotional like that, I think that's a very good thing. The events thing is very good as well. And also, I think the thing is as well is when you want to go into publishing, is to be aware of, you know, the different types of kinds. You know, so there, you know, you might want to be a publicist, which is the role where you arrange the author's publicity, you send the books out, you cultivate relationships, you keep track of what's going on in the media, you look for opportunities, you look for things in the news that your writer might know something about, and you look for like ways to place stories. And I find that quite rewarding. I mean, I'm an editor who's fairly overbearing towards my publicity colleagues, not overbearing, but I have a lot of ideas, and because I used to do it, you know, that's like I can't train my mind out of that as much as I don't want to do the donkey work. I want to kind of make sure that they're doing the things that I think have possibility.
It's so great to have an editor who's able to do that, though, for the author, because so much pressure is put back on the author, Luke, more and more, I think, isn't there, to kind of cultivate that themselves.
Yeah, the social media thing's arguable, isn't it? I mean, it's sort of taken as given that if you're online a lot and social media is helpful. I'm sure it is. It's also probably makes you go insane, you know, if you're not cut out for that kind of life, and it's a lot of time away from concentrated intellectual thought. So
Look, I've got a couple of
social media.
yeah. Just a kind of couple of questions, sort of on the other couple of business questions. Mike Harper asks about being able to, about the tens of thousands of pounds from a fiction novel. About, you know, what are the chances of an author being able to make reasonable money? Like, I would say that most authors have kind of got a portfolio, kind of a life still for the vast majority. But Luke, you might want to say something about that.
Yes, I mean, most of the writers I give money to or buy books for at their low advances, they're like, you know, I've paid between 3,000 and 14,000 for two. So like, that's not very much money. You know, you can see that, you know, the 14,000 deal I did, that's not going to change the man's life. As a writer myself, I mean, I'll tell you exactly what I got paid for my first two books. I got paid 20,000 for my first, which I was amazed by how much money that was, even though, you know, it's not a salary, is it, for 3 years' work. And then the second book, I got paid £3,000. So that gives you a clear idea of the value of my literary career. And God knows what the next one will be. So you can, I mean, the way to make money by books is foreign rights sales. So the more, you know, if you write a book that for some reason France and Germany and Italy and America want, then you're getting paid 5 times what you would get for one thing. So that's where writers who have an international audience are the ones who live off it. And I'm not exactly sure what the trick of that is. My first book was translated into Italian and got a nice deal then from a publisher called Mondadori, but since then nothing. So but yeah, I mean, that's and it can, I mean, it's straight, you know, I've got a friend who's been paid £1,000 a book for his kind of Brazilian noirish crime series, and all of a sudden this last one has been sold like for 10,000 euros in France and 10,000 euros in Spain. So suddenly out of nowhere, these books that seem dead have got a new leaf of life, and he'll be a debut writer in Spain and Italy. So but yeah, I do think realistic, don't pin your hopes on a career in writing. I would try to find a way of writing that, whilst living cheaply and earning some money, not full time if you can. That seems to me to be the best way of being a writer. And it may be, and if you have to work full time, then, you know,
I think that's really good advice, and really realistic. Again, you know, just watching our graduates who've gone on to writing lives, and so many of them are combining their professional writing life with other kinds of work. And which it need not necessarily be a bad thing either for how you live your life. A couple of other questions, Luke, about presentation, about do you have a sense of what it is that marks out a manuscript when it comes across your desk from an agent? And then a question about, you know, apart from it being, you know, proofread and cleanly presented, is there anything that when the book comes in that you want to know alongside the manuscript, that's useful?
Yeah, I wonder what it is that makes a book stick out. It's an interesting question, because as well as what agents writing to me, you're sort of being your own agent when you write to an agent as well, and you're trying to do the same thing that an agent's doing to me, and that you're trying to make something stand out to somebody who probably gets a lot of these type of emails every day or every week. And so the things I would advise to focus on in that case, or the things that impress me, are, again, concision, it's persuasiveness, is something making me want to read it. So I suppose the copy is something like a blurb, something like that kind of seductive copy on the back of a book that makes you want to go in. Biographical details are always quite interesting, I suppose. You know, if someone has an interesting story. Like I was in a big auction for a Northern Irish novel a couple of weeks ago, which I didn't get, which I absolutely loved. A guy called Michael Nolan.
Yeah, I saw the announcement yesterday.
Yeah. It's I made the highest offer I've ever made for a book, which was I'll tell you, it's £65,000 offer for 2 books. But I think Penguin paid twice that or something like that. And it'd be very hard for them to make money on that, but who knows? But what I liked about this, it was, you know, it was a story, kind of autobiographical story about a man who punches another man in the face at a party when he's ridiculed, and does community service. And and it's by a writer he's a fiction editor for a magazine called The Tangerine. I'd urge you to look at. It's a really good. There are a few really good fiction magazines, literary journals, and this is one of the ones that have emerged in the last few years that I think is very good. And there are a number of things that appealed to me this, because it was a working class story. I've always been quite interested in working class writing. I've published a lot of it over my time, and I find it's something that London publishing sort of often sees as what do I mean? Somehow too gritty to be commercial, I suppose, or somehow too, not fun. Anyway. But this book it's not exactly fun, but it's moving and beautiful. So that was something I immediately prioritised, because whatever reason that spoke to me. When you're writing to someone else, I think the main thing is just to be sane. Be very careful and sane. Write a polite letter saying, I sent this to you because you do this and I do this, and there's an obvious link between these things. It's like you publish the writers I most admire, and I think I'm working in a similar fiction, and I think you would appreciate my book because I know that you like these writers. So that would be someone telling me that quite clearly. I'm going, okay, well, this isn't just a punt. You're basically you're trying not to appear like you've sent it to everyone and you don't know anything about them. You're trying to appear like I've sent this to you particularly because I know you and you will like this, and I'm aware of you, and I've done some research. So that would be the main thing about approaching people, I would say, and just sell your book like it's the back cover of a book, really. Try and make it appealing. Don't tell everything that goes on about it, but beguile the reader with some of the suspense and drama that's in the book.
More storytelling.
Exactly.
Luke, Chris asks, a very Jekyll and Hyde-ish question here about, is your author personality different from your editor personality? And are you more or less sympathetic to your authors? And a related question, which comes from Peace, and Peace is asking the question, like, what do you think are the qualities that make a good editor? And I suppose this is also reflecting on your experience as a writer also, and that kind of dual role that you have.
Yeah. Let's start with the last one. I don't know. I have the same kind of slightly chaotic personality as an editor and a writer. Not particularly professional in every sense, but I'm very professional in terms of promoting my books and things. I'm fairly willing to slag off other writers and publishers in a way that's probably not politic. But anyway, I'm digressing. I think what makes a good editor is a good reader. The weird thing about being an editor is you don't read as much good fiction as you do before you're an editor. Because your reading load goes up so drastically with submissions that you can't read War and Peace, or you can, but you've got to carve out a 2-week holiday in Spain or something like that. So but I mentioned this not because part of being an editor is actually still doing the reading that's not the submissions, and keeping a kind of sense of what's good, that's not just what's the best in my submissions pile. Part of being a good editor is, as a fiction editor, you're slightly passive. You're much more passive than a non-fiction editor. A non-fiction editor can come up with an idea for a book and go, he'd be perfect to write this book. And so in some ways, it's a more creative thing to be a non-fiction editor. The creativity in being a fiction editor, the creativity in being a fiction editor is working out how to improve a book and seeing what a book could be. So I guess that's what I pride myself on, is seeing what a book could be, and you're looking for a reason to turn things down as an editor all the time, because you've got this massive pile. And I think part of being a good editor is to not give yourself a reason to turn it down too quickly if there's something good, and you believe that. What you also do as an editor, if you think a book needs work, is you actually talk to the writer first. You don't buy it before you've had a chat with them and you've actually had a conversation. So no, I didn't buy this book until I'd sat down with them. I had a couple of pints with them and like given, you know, and being quite frank with them what I thought the failings of the book were, but what I thought the real strengths were, and how I thought we could work together to make it as good as it could be. So that, and the other thing that makes you a good editor is the hustle, really, is the promotional thing, and you're sort of like the director of a team to make the book good. So it's in a place like Serpents Tale, which is, you know, there are 3 editors. There's a publicity team of about 5 or 6 who serve us and profile, and it's sort of making your book heard in-house, you know, and promoting it, and constantly selling it to your colleagues, saying this book is big. Don't make this the book that you put to the bottom of your pile or you deprioritize, because publicists will always be working on 4 or 5 books at a time, and they will not give each book the same attention, you know, and they will judge for themselves which are the ones I'm most likely to get press coverage for, or which is the one where I can most sell copies of books to keep our publishing house afloat. And if you're not making the case for that book yourself and saying and guiding the reasons why it's going to work, then you're failing as an editor. So you do have this kind of or I see this as this role to sort of oversee the book and have a vision for how the book should be received and why it can demand attention, and communicating those reasons why you think it demands attention to your colleagues, and beyond your colleagues, to reviewers, and you know, I still have quite good relations with a lot of freelance reviewers and things like that from back in the day, and from just drinking in London, really. So, yeah.
Oh dear, Luke. Okay, a couple of practical questions, and we're nearly at the end of our time with Luke now. So if you do have a couple of others, just pop them in now. Peace has asked about translating and translators, but I think that's something that really kind of happens elsewhere with authors and with agents. Publishers don't really go looking for translators of books. I'm right, Luke?
No, I suppose if you buy a book that's in another language, you would go looking for a translator unless there was one already attached to the project. But yeah, translators do approach, you know, translators can be quite valuable in suggesting, because they read in a language they don't, they can operate as a kind of scout. There is a business called literary scouting, in which we don't have literary scouts, we can't afford them, but I have friends who are literary scouts, and they share their reports with me. But they, you know, their job is to digest what's going on in a country and say, this is a hot book, you should think about buying this book. But a translator can do some of that themselves. You know, if you find a really good book, then a translator, I'd be very happy to hear from translators who have an interesting book idea and thought there was a market for this book. And I suppose then you give like a little sample of a chapter or something like that, and yeah, that might be a nice thing to do as a translator. Yeah.
Sam has a question about saying, was it useful or important for you, rather, to have published your own work in terms of how you work as an editor? And do you think that's almost like, you're a little unusual, Luke, I would say, in the fiction world, and being doing both, or am I wrong?
Yeah, there's loads of us now, actually. There's this new young generation. My colleague Leonora, she's got a debut collection coming out. The editorial assistant at Jonathan Cape sold a novel this year. The editorial assistant at Borough Press. There's loads of editorial assistants who have just stopped assisting during COVID and have bashed out novels, which are all selling now, it seems. But you know, anyway, maybe that's misleading. But yeah, does it help? I think it probably helps in some creative sense of editing that you know, I wrestle with how to create structure and pace all the time with my own work, so that knowledge is helpful for me when I look at other people's work. I think there are loads of really good editors who aren't writers. In some way, being a writer is a distraction from being a really good editor, because it's, you know, the more single-minded you are about something, perhaps the better you are. I don't know.
Very good. I know that sounds right. And another kind of straightforward question about, you know, is an agent absolutely essential, do you think, for fiction writers? Tom Guy asks.
No, but yes and no. I mean, the bigger publishers won't read stuff without an agent. I mean, I'd read stuff with an agent if somebody wrote me a letter that made me want to read it, you know. So in some sense, you know, it's fun for editors to find stuff without agents. It's you feel like you're doing the real work again then, and finding stuff that's not go, because an agent sends it to like 20 different publishers, and so if it's good, then it's going to be a frenzy. You know, if it's, or not if it's good, but if for whatever reason it captures the kind of zeitgeist and the imagination, then it's very unlikely you actually get to publish the book, you know, because there'll be all these people in, and as an independent, we can't compete with this big money that the corporates can splash. So yeah, what remind me what
just about how important is an agent? So it is important, but not essential.
I'd say it's not important. I'd say if you're a fiction writer, I would try and get an agent probably. But if you're a very experimental one and you think you think your market is with the small presses, I think the small presses would hear from you directly as well. I mean, an agent is useful. An agent takes quite a lot of money. You know, they take 15% and then you pay 3% tax on that as well. So it's 18% of your earnings go straight to, well, 15% goes to the agent, 3% goes to the tax man. And so, yeah, that's something to bear in mind. It's not an insubstantial amount of money. I mean, in theory, an agent will sell your book abroad as well, and will make sure you don't get ripped off with royalties. And you can get advice on that if you join a society of authors, a society I don't much like. But you know, they will give a they do a service, so that would be achieved. You know, if you were worried about your contract, you wouldn't necessarily need an agent to do that. You could. There are other means. But they know the industry in a way that you don't, and I mean, they'll put your book in the hands of the right people in theory. If you get a good agent, then and that good agent believes in your book, then you're on a winner, not necessarily on a winner, but you're in the best position possible, because they don't waste time. You know, they don't waste their own time on purpose, and they know the people, and they probably stand the best chances. They stand a better chance of selling your book than you do directly.
Yeah, I think that's because their livelihood depends upon, you know, doing the very best for you as well. They don't have other, you know, so it is hard, but it's hard to track down an agent as well. Luke, I think we're going to finish there at 3 minutes to 5. I'm going to thank you very much. So I hope you all found that as in. I always love hearing Luke talk about the business of books, because he has a writer's approach and a lovely skepticism about the business as well, which we all appreciate and need. So thank you very much, Luke.
Yeah. The one thing I want to say is that I'll be running a series of publishing talks in semester 2, where I interview an agent or an editor every week on a Monday at 5 p.m. So we'll find a way to get. The program's not put together yet, but I hope I might see some of you.
Yeah,
I think they might be in person even. Who knows?
I think we hope that there will be, and that'll be for the Centre for New Writing crew among you as well. But next week we're going to have Ella Wakatama. So Ella's going to be talking about her work at Canongate now, from Luke also knows, and then previously her work at Granta, at Canongate, at Cape, and others as well. But I also recommend Luke's brilliant second novel, Theft, to you as well. If you're looking for a really, really entertaining read and kind of time off from your academic studies, it's a terrific book. And thanks to MUP and to Chris Hart and the team there for setting things up today and running all the Zoom. And I hope I see you all next week.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a good weekend.
Take care.